5:04. First, we just want to say thank y'all so much for coming. This means a lot to us. It feels like it's been forever in the making. I don't know how closely y'all follow kind of the work we do with all y'all, but we started what feels like way back in 2018 with a heavy focus on teachers and education, and especially in the South, and equitable education in the South. And so we've always been sort of centered around a conference. So we had a free conference series that we put on in 2018 in Jacksonville, and we had one in 2019 in Dahlonega, Georgia, with various themes and focus on education in the South. And then, newsflash, we had 2020 was strange, right? And so the conference had to take a back seat. We were scheduled to come to Charleston and keep going, and we couldn't. We had to cancel it, like all the world canceled everything. And it all seemed to carry over long enough that 2021's conference didn't get to happen either. So we put our heads together and we tried to decide what's something else we can do to keep people connected and to keep people talking about social justice in the South. And especially coming from some folks, Rebecca and I are both socially awkward individuals, particularly on the internet. So we were trying to think, how do you connect people and do cool things and tell the stories of people doing really cool things now in the South through COVID, and it not be cheesy, right? So we had this idea to put together a zine. I had to Google what a zine was, but after we figured out what that was, we put this call out for people to tell those stories that I just mentioned. Tell the stories of how you're resisting in COVID in the South. Tell the stories of what's going on in your part of the world. And people did, and people sent in all kind of brilliant stuff. And so then we decided this stuff is all way too brilliant to just do as one zine. And maybe we can connect people together better if we do something like this. If we invite the people who wrote the really cool things to get in front of their computer and tell us their story, read their piece, and share their stuff. So that's what we're doing tonight. It's our first one. We're super excited about it. Emily Blair Breyer is our first participant. If you got a chance to read her piece, it's up on the website. If you didn't, I think Emily's going to link it here in the chat in a few minutes. But we're excited to have Emily. We read her piece and thought this is brilliant. And then I went to the Appalachian Studies Conference and like snuck into Emily's sessions to see what she was doing and realized that like she's incredibly brilliant and way smarter than me. So we're really glad that she's here. Rebecca, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to my rambling before we turn it over to Emily.
Nope, just a big warm thank you to everybody who's taking their time this evening to sit in and chat with us, with Emily, and support local artists who write and do good work to share. Adam, I apologize if you already mentioned the illustrator, but we really try to make the work multimedia, and we like to support local folks. And so Rachel Husa is our illustrator, and she is here in Gainesville in Florida. So she's not on the call right now, but we really try to support the people around us as much as possible. So thank you for supporting us.
Yeah. So Emily is at Western Carolina. I always call it Western North Carolina. That's correct. It's in Western North Carolina, Western Carolina University, where she teaches and does brilliant things. And I will let her fully introduce all that she does. So Emily, before you read your piece, could you kind of tell us about your work and how you're connected to the South and how you're connected to this project?
Yeah, so I grew up in southwestern Virginia in Appalachia, and was there, all through my childhood, and then went to Virginia Tech for my undergrad, where I found out I was Appalachian when I was 18. I didn't know, and I took a class and found out, and so that really got me interested in Appalachian studies, and did a master's degree at the University of Louisville, which I think I mentioned in the piece, which is a very different kind of South. And so I learned a lot about the South there by being on the edge of it. And then I've taught at community college in North Carolina for a few years. I'm going into my second year here at Western. And a lot of the work that I've done in the past, I've written a lot of poetry and nonfiction. I'm moving more now into academia, whatever that means. So I have like an academic article coming out on teaching, and I've been doing a lot of conversations about teaching and being in the classroom and the writing classroom and writing and identity and voices and advocacy and all of these things. So I'm really excited to be here with y'all. I was excited to be the first one.
Yeah. All that sounds brilliant. And Western is lucky to have you. I know. I spent a while teaching in North Carolina, so I'm from North Georgia, but North Carolina's always got a special place in my heart. So for this piece, before you read it, could you kind of prime us on like when you wrote this, what were you hoping that the reader would get out of this?
Yeah, so it's a short essay, like a nonfiction piece, and I wrote it I think in the week or two after I eloped in October. And so and it's about, my marriage and being queer in Appalachia and being queer in the South. And the call for the zine was about resistance and was about, flourishing in the South and what does that look like. And what I was thinking about as I went back and read the piece, in preparation for tonight and in thinking about, this talk and things like that, was how with the piece I wanted to sort of pull the lid off of like my thought process with being a queer Southerner and a queer Appalachian. And that thought process is very much that like there is, I'm going to say this and it's not going to be great. There's no such thing as like the box of it. So there's no such thing as a queer Southern experience or an Appalachian Southern experience or Southern experience or, this, that, and the other. And I think that a lot of the times in hopes of finding community and finding family and finding connectedness, we do tend to want to flatten our experiences a little bit. And so in reading this over again, I was like, hey, that's not too bad. You forget what you write 8 months out. I see me starting to grapple with the idea of being married and queer and Appalachian in the South. And, we're down the road a little bit now, and it's interesting to see where my mind was at that time.
Yeah. All of that sounds awesome. I can't kind of wait for you to read this and just hear it read. If you're just joining us, welcome. We're glad you're here. I know we had 3 or 4 people jump in while Emily was talking, but you are just in time. We asked a couple intro questions to Emily, and she just finished answering them, and she's about to read her piece. And then after that, y'all, we hope that it's not that, how Zoom goes. Everybody kind of gets socially awkward, like they don't want to say anything. But we hope after Emily's done, you read this piece and you take it in your brain, and you have the brilliant author right in front of you that we can engage in some Q&A and some conversation. Nobody here is fancy. Everybody's laid back. You ask any question you want. I'm sure I'm speaking for Rebecca and Emily when I say that. So welcome. So Emily, we'll just turn it to you, let you read it, and then we'll have some conversation.
Okay. So I just went ahead and put it in the chat too, if people want to pull it up and follow along. I know that I have a hard time. I get distracted, and then 15 seconds later, I'm like, where are we at? So I'm going to go ahead and pull it up and start reading it. So this is marriage meditation. My wife and I got married on the side of a mountain, not the top as planned because of whiteout fog. So instead of exchanging vows on a bald cow pasture in western North Carolina with the mountains falling all around, we stood in front of a mossy rock wall beneath orange trees, mist drifting between branches and filtering the softest light across their face. You can't see in pictures how they bounce from one foot to the other, so excited to marry me, or how still I am, the seriousness of our devotion to each other washing over me again and again. That's us, really. That's the 2 of us together. 3 guests attended our wedding thanks to COVID-19 and neither of us having a wedding fund to host a big party, the likes of which would have sent me into sleepless, hive-riddled, hair-losing anxiety. I'm a college instructor and my spouse is a social worker. We make much less money than you'd think, considering we have 12 years of college between us. Our 3 guests were all queer Southerners too, and 2 of them have been married for years. I was 15 when Hillary Clinton ran for president, so I was 15 the first time I heard the phrase dyke in a pantsuit. My cousin Tyler had a little jingle for that presidential race, set to the tune of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which I can't remember well, but I recall queer in there somewhere too. In my high school library, a few miles from the land where I grew up and where my family still lives in southwestern Virginia, I only found Obama's first biography because somebody had turned it around to show just the paper edge, making it stand out more. My history teacher for 9th and 12th grades, Miss King, had a white grade crew cut, wore men's polos, smoked in the boiler room, and had a roommate who looked just like her for 30 years. We'd see them in Walmart sometimes, pushing one grocery cart, Miss King and her roommate, another woman with a gray crew cut and khakis. Nobody called Miss King a dyke, not even in private. I've never been able to parse exactly why. Nope, there we go. I had been out 2 months the first time I got street harassed for being queer. A woman in the post office parking lot in the historic and hoity-toity Highlands neighborhood of Louisville, maybe a block from a triangle of gay bars, yelled at my then girlfriend and me out of her car window, her face wrenched with hatred. The next summer on a patio, my date went to the bathroom and the men at the next table over opined loudly about our sex life. When she got back, I was too scared to tell her, lest they hear and asked if we could leave. On our walk to one of those gay bars, holding hands, a car full of men yelled at us to, quote, get to a gay bar already. My date, who had been out for decades, yelled, we're working on it, while I sweated through my dress in tears. The 1-2 punch of casual fetishization and rejection back to back, both making threats of sexual and gender violence, that I can tell you this, and it won't be surprising, still make my body ache with tension and dread. I came out in the South, yes, but in the metropolitan South, the genteel, basically Midwest gloss of Louisville, a confusing in-between land of politics, history, and oppression. I'll never forget the hostility and joy side by side that I found in coming out there. Sometimes, when I'm walking into the grocery with my spouse, or when we're in downtown Asheville walking arm in arm, I practice what I will say to men in close-fitting Oakley sunglasses and Punisher t-shirts, their Salt Life and American flag bumper stickers, sometimes accompanying that very 90s comic of a little boy peeing on something, like the name of our Democratic governor, as a cherry on top of their mushy ideology, if they yell at us out of their truck windows. I know that I just listed a bunch of signifiers that you may or may not understand, and that none of these things individually make someone a homophobe. And maybe I'm part of the problem here, typecasting the person who would harass us, just like folks typecast my Appalachian twang and love of these mountains for something sinister, uncritical, and ideological. But in any case, I think about how I would position myself between my spouse and a threat, even with just some fake confident posturing. So there we are, 5 queer Southerners from 3 states holding a wedding on the side of a mountain in Western North Carolina, where none of us are from, but 3 of us have ended up. And I'm crying every few minutes, great heaving sobs with my eyes wide open so I don't mess up my makeup. And my wife is reminding me to look up and breathe to slow the tears down. And nothing about our wedding was queer except all of it. No hashtag love is love, no mention of everything we have overcome, the street harassment, the queerphobic questions, the assumptions. Everything was queer and nothing was queer about getting married. All of my friends are queer Southerners. We were friends before and after we came out. We flocked to each other because of some frequency of queerness that not even we could hear at the time but felt. Being so maligned and so loved can feel like equilibrium. My Appalachian accent marks me as an insider at my new job in Western North Carolina, not like those tourists, even though I'm from Virginia. Elsewhere, the same accent could discredit my ideas, mark me as unintelligent or backwards. Because coming out as queer allowed me to feel whole and happy for the first time in my life, and because meeting my spouse answered prayers I didn't know I was making all those years, I can never think of queerness as some differentiation of myself from others. If anything, I think queerphobic people must have something missing in them, some empathetic or logical switch left unflipped. When I think about our wedding just a couple weeks ago, I think about the joys of invisible resistance, the joys of doing what we wanted out of love, and the joys of not explaining. None of my friends who are queer Southerners or queer Appalachians are confused by my seeming contradictions, my intense love for the land I grew up on and my desire to never live back home again, my pursuit and teaching of higher education and my disdain for the processes I went through to get my degrees, my adherence to tradition beside a rejection of hetero and cisnormative gender and relationship roles, our shared creation of meaning, of a new kind of queer Appalachian narrative that marries our love for our community with our acknowledgement that it may not love us back, is just starting. We know when we work in our communities that our students and clients might think they hate people like us, or that we're interlopers to their traditional family values, even after I change my last name and we monogamously couple ourselves together forever. I've heard that we're playing into patriarchal heteronormativity for getting married at all, that real leftist queers wouldn't get the government involved, and that we're part of the problem, and maybe we are. Maybe normalizing queerness dilutes it somehow, makes it less a resistance. But I don't think we should be forced to forgo the real romantic and commitment reasons that straight people get to marry one another, adding another thing that we don't get to do to a sometimes long list just because it stems from a tradition less than revolutionary. I've never questioned the truth or validity of my queerness, and I never hid it once I figured it out. Maybe a bit late at 22, but I was told that hating dating men was normal because men were terrible all the time, and didn't think until that age that perhaps I'd been sticking around situations that other people wouldn't have found so abhorrent. Never questioning, never grappling feels again like a contradiction. On the one hand, I have persevered for years, and on the other, feel that I had nothing to persevere over, because accepting this part of myself was as natural as waking up in the morning. I know this experience is not universal. In all honesty, I don't know how to frame my marriage without these twin contradictions. A revolution and a protest, maybe, an adherence to outdated patriarchal gender norms and capitalistic notions of women's bodies that we have dragged into the 21st century and conflated with romantic love, perhaps. For someone who grew up without knowing the term queer elder, much less where to find one, it feels like we are finding an old path, worn lovingly into the mountainside, that shows we are not the first ones here. There's a comfort in that, at least. And living and working again in Appalachia, the place I left for 5 years and swore to always return, means I might begin to wear that path myself. We might together, creating an easier time for someone else. Standing on that mountain wrapped in mist and fog and love, I thought, there's no way this is a bad thing. There's no way this isn't where we're supposed to be.
I guess I mean I was speechless when I first read it, and I'm speechless now. I really am. Emily, it is so good. It is so good. It is if anybody's got some money to fund the arts, this should be a clear reason why you have to fund the arts. It's just moving. I've talked to my big hillbilly white self enough. So if some of y'all have questions for Emily, we would love for you just to unmute and chime in, and ask or comment or do whatever you feel so moved to do.
Or y'all could put them in the chat too. I know I hate to unmute in a Zoom. So if you want to put them in the chat as well, I can read them in my voice.
That is very good differentiation, which I'm terrible at as a sped professor, clearly. Dana gave you a shout out that it was lovely. So like I learned sometime that you're supposed to wait like 10 or 15 seconds or something, and I'm just way too socially awkward to do it.
Wait time is really good.
It is. It is good.
It is good.
But difficult.
Yeah, I think because partially, I think silence sometimes feels awkward, like we have to fill it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
All right. Yeah, my bad. It wasn't kind of got me at the wrong timing. I was just catching a snack, and so I was like, "Can't talk with your mouth full." That's what they told us. So just just had a second there. But yeah, I want to say hi to everybody, wherever you are. It's always nice to be able to connect with people. To talk to Zine. I mean, there's so many parts of it, that I could say I resonate with, but just above all, to get back to the ending about finding the art and self-expression and like just seeing it like there physically. And like my background is sort of, I'm undergrad at the University of Florida, going on what should be my last year, and most of my research has actually been in oral history, and so fair amount of it is in the South, and it's always nice to just see like and hear like a perspective, sort of like seeing like how one person, two people, or a group, etc., fit in within an area, especially when folks tend to feel a certain way about the South, which I don't really get, but is what it is. So just wanted to say that the expression is really beautiful. And like just to pick one part, like queer elder, I as of recent, like literally like a week and a half ago, I just was kind of doing some family history and seeing how, like folks that are, I guess, like my grandparents' age, but sort of like I guess would be like my great aunt. Um, like they're one of those things where it's one of those secrets. They can really be out, but it's kind of there when you see it, and it kind of aches to see that they couldn't really be themselves, and seeing how it is now. Like I'm from Italy. There's a lot of things going on about this right now, but it's beautiful to sort of like, in a way, you get that heritage through you, like through the feeling of it. And art really seems to be like the medium, I guess, which gets it out the most, at least for me. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Well, I'm going to ask a question because I have a question. So, Emily, I mean, I've read your and in reviewing the piece and putting it together and back and forth the illustrator, and I mean, I've read this thing, I don't know, a dozen times at this point, and a lot of it stands out to me. But there's this phrase that you use, that I don't know, I don't know that saying I like it feels like too elementary, but you talk about this idea of invisible resistance, right? And I wonder if you can talk more about like how that phrase came to be in your writing, because I do feel like that was sort of the call, right? The call for the zine was sort of people are resisting in all sorts of ways, and it doesn't have to be, as you say in the piece, like a love is love hashtag at your wedding. Like you can just go get married on a mountain because that's your business, right? And I find that to be very empowering in a lot of ways. And I wonder, what your thoughts were when that phrase came out.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of discussion about visibility and queerness and threat and risk and safety that is associated with that. And I think a lot of the time, being visible can feel unsafe or can feel risky. And to look at me, I don't look very queer, and I know that very much, especially in the classroom. I'm aware of the fact that if they're going to know, I'm going to have to come out, because they're going to be like, what's your husband do? And I'm going to be like, we're about to learn about 3 things about me very quickly. Like I got several facts for you. And so there's this sort of, to me, there's just this beautiful, like right now I'm in my friend's house who has much better internet than I do, who lives by campus, and he was one of the 3 people who came to my wedding. And we met in Louisville, and he was one of the first friends I had who was out before I was even out. And there's this recognition of each other even when you're not recognizing each other, that I just see so often. And to me, it is a revolutionary act to, we had our well pump go out in our house that we rent. And so there were, a few guys there from the area who were coming in to do their plumber thing. And, there's just this moment where it's like me and my spouse, and we live there together and we have on wedding rings. And it's like, y'all are here to fix the well. We live here and you're very nice. And it's just this moment of, it's there and it's not there. And you see it and you don't see it. And thinking about, queer people I knew in childhood who it was never mentioned and never was discussed. To me, that's a quiet sort of resistance too, is to just live your life, be very happy, be as authentic to yourself as you want to be or you can be. And that can be a resistance too. I think a lot of the times we think of it as these much louder, more visible moments. And I think that, showing up to the classroom, I might be the first queer out adult that some of my students meet. And it's like, yep, and I drink my coffee 4 cups at a time, just like you, like if we're just here to learn about commas today. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to feel revolutionary, I guess, to be revolutionary.
Right. Yeah. I love it. I mean, I feel like that empowers so many people. I mean, so many people say, I'm not a revolutionary. I'm not an advocate. I don't have that personality. I don't know those words. People, whatever, but what you're saying is you don't have to have any words. You just live, and that can be revolutionary.
Yeah. I really appreciated the call. I haven't been writing as much creatively in the last year or so. And when the call came out, I was like, oh, I'd like to do something with this. And so I sat down and considered it and thought about it. And I really appreciated that it was this prompt that was sort of helped me think through what I was feeling at the time and sort of tie it back to, other identities and other places, and sort of consider, it's very much a snapshot, I think, of where I was in that moment in time when the call to submit went out. And so I appreciate y'all for having this sort of springboard, for having this idea that is that like helped me, produce something, but also I think that it really helps people think through where they're at.
Yeah, when I wrote the call, I think that's why that invisible resistance phrase popped out to me as soon as I read your piece, because I wrote it and we called it Down Yonder. I have a stereotypical Appalachian grandmother who is now passed, but she'd grown up in poverty. She'd experienced incredible abuse, spousal abuse, all sorts of abuse. Was still the kindest, gentlest person you knew, that went to the church on Sunday morning and played Down Yonder, the song, with just fury. And I could, and no one would ever know that she was resisting so many traumas, right? It was just her way of doing it. So your piece got me thinking deeply about how many people in the South are, and we say the South because we're talking about the South, but this could be true of anywhere on planet Earth, right? How many people are wrestling with traumas, insecurities, all these things, and yet resisting in their own ways, just maybe invisibly, right? So not everybody rages against the machine as loud as they can. Like some people just play Down Yonder at church on Sunday, right? And it's their outlet. Or some people just, do whatever it is people do. But you just captured it way better than I could have ever said it. So you said it in like 2 words. I needed 3 minutes of just awkwardly rambling about my grandma. What other questions might y'all have? I know you got some.
I had something, but now I'm just tickled, and I'm thinking about your grandma. Forgive me.
Well, she's probably tickled too. So
Good. I wanted to refer back to the transcript, or no, not the transcript, the piece. Well, yes, I wanted to talk about the use of the word queer. I had mentioned it in the chat. Our young people are not hearing that. Like, I know that that is only reaching them if they are adamant in their search on, you know, whatever devices through the internet, right? That's where their exposure is coming from to the word queer. And um, its associations, the word queer, its associations with defiance, with standing up for the oppressed. That's something that they are also not familiar with. And I think that your piece communicates that in a very subtle, beautiful way. And thank you for sharing it with us. I just wanted to touch on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I think I can get a question. I can draw it so it's not overly wordy. To look towards the end, like the literally the end of the Zine, when it's like, you know, you're in the mountain and there's the drawing of it and there's this fog and love and like there's no, sorry, I don't want to misquote, so I'm gonna make sure I read directly off of it. There's no way this isn't where we're supposed to be. And it's like how like so much of like I guess my generation especially, like it's a lot of like you gotta go to like the big city, you gotta go to big liberal New York, you gotta go to like, you know, the main spots. And it's almost like you gotta get away from red, you know what I mean? You gotta get away from rural. And like I think it's so powerful just to hear that. But like within like in like your own perspective, like how do you reconcile like your roots and like you being able to express yourself without leaving the land that you're from?
Yeah, I think that that's a good question. I feel very much that there is ignorance and hatred everywhere, and I saw that very much because I came out in Louisville, which is a very metropolitan area with you know, I lived in a neighborhood with 3 gay bars, and that is where I have been harassed most, which was was supposed to be a safe place that always votes Democrat and has, you know, in this house we believe signs in every lawn and, you know, everything like that. And so I think that there's a perception that there's more safety in urban areas. Whereas I think that a lot of the times in more rural areas of the South and Appalachia, it's sort of a like my business and your business culture. And it's a much, there's a sense of privacy in a rural area. And so there's that. I also am not fully myself if I'm not in Appalachia. And I found that out by leaving for 5 years. I was in Louisville and then I was in Charlotte, North Carolina for 3 years, or like the surrounding suburb area, which is very flat and hot and has a lot of chain restaurants. I'm sorry if you're from Charlotte. I found it horrible. And so, you know, I thought that I wanted to live in a city and I thought that I wanted the culture and the museums and the, you know, this, that, and the other. And every year I would apply for jobs to try to get further west into North Carolina. And I would be, you know, trying to get back towards something that felt more like home. And I think a big part of that is just because I'm not doing the work that I want to do outside of this place. I'm not working with the students I want to work with. I'm not having the conversations I want to have outside of this place. And my very funny story about this is that one of my best friends lives in Massachusetts now. And I went up to visit her, and we were visiting with her friends in Western Mass. And like we get back in the car afterwards, and she looks at me and she says, "You are so painfully Southern." And I was like, "Yes." Like just very much. She was like, "I forgot." It's like, yeah, it's just who I am, and I can't really get it out of me.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to see. And actually just remembered this hat is, I don't know if you can read it well, but from a small store when I was in this is in North Carolina. It's in the gosh, what's the town called? It's like the tallest, it's like the one, it's like the highest altitude west of the Mississippi. I mean, it was probably like really touristy, but just the mountains. It's a shame we couldn't drive out, but I've been to like more states than the average American, I guess, because I'm not American. Been to like 38, I think, or 40, and Appalachia is 100% like top of my short list. So Mount Mitchell, it might be. Let me look it up real quick.
Yeah, it's Mount Mitchell. Mount Mitchell, right?
Might be. Yeah, it's just gorgeous. I mean, the best sunset I ever heard. I mean, I've ever seen. Beautiful people. So, and I love that you're doing the work with the students you want to work with, because like, it's there's a lot of us students that we always appreciate that. So I'm sure you students appreciate you.
Emily, I have a question not at all related to your piece, but just listen to you talk. So I was kind of like you. I'm from Madison County, Georgia, which if you look at the Appalachian Regional Commission's map, we make the bottom cut, right? So I learned I was Appalachian at the University of Georgia in a history class where everybody showed me the map and said, "Aren't you from there?" And I said, "I am." And they said, "Oh, you're Appalachian." And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. So I wonder, in your head, how do you differentiate, like, and this is really just me being curious, and I'm really asking uh, a strange question, but do you differentiate in your head Appalachian identity and Southern identity, or do you just think more broadly? Because I can't answer that question myself. I don't know. I just think about home, and it is what it is to me, and I really don't care what. I don't mean that rudely, but I don't care what it is to everyone else. It's what it is to me, and I wonder how you reconcile that kind of duality of identity.
Yeah, so my spouse is from Wilmington, North Carolina, and I'm from southwestern Virginia. And I sort of would use Appalachian and the South interchangeably when I talked about myself in the past, and sort of, Emily Blair is Southern, Emily Blair's Appalachian. To me it was, 6 one way, half a dozen the other. And then met my spouse and I was like, "Oh, you're Southern, and I'm Appalachian." It took a differentiate. It took being very close to people who were not Appalachian but were Southern for me to sort of to see the differences in culture, I guess. But yeah, it's definitely not. I have conversations with people about this, about Appalachian identity for folks who don't have that experience in college, and if it has legs, sort of. I see a lot of identity in counties here in North Carolina. I see a lot of identity in regions, so the WNC region, the coast. And so I think that I don't really have an answer for that, whether Appalachian, saying, I am Appalachian, is an identity that folks are using outside of sort of the Appalachian studies, college-y context. And for me, that gives me pause, just because I think that I don't know how useful it is outside of the college if people aren't using it, if that makes sense. Versus being Southern is a universal point of pride, right? Like Southern by the grace of God. It's just like it's being Southern, and so I think that that's part of the using one or the other. To me, it's I feel like if I say I'm Southern, people will get that more. Versus Appalachian, I think is still seen as a little more niche.
Yeah, I get that. And then the dialect, and I mean, there's so many conversations we have. Dana said she wondered if the cornbreads are different. In Appalachia, it's a pound of cornbread. I mean, I don't know where it is, where y'all are, but
My mom made it out of the Martha White little packet
there it
from
is.
$1.
And it was delicious.
And it was delicious.
Exactly. Any more questions you guys might have?
I have a
conversation?
question, but I want to wait until I'd love to hear from a few other people we haven't maybe heard from. Now's a really good time to take some space.
I just want to say I loved your piece. I thought it was incredibly well written and insightful. I really loved where you talk about the joys of not explaining. I have two children who are both queer, and they've both been on a process of discovery, and it's still an ongoing journey for them. And I want to share this piece with them and talk to them about that joy of not explaining, because even though here you're talking about both the geographical context and also the context of saying, hey, I don't care what traditionalists say I should or shouldn't do, or you know, I can just reject these binaries. I can just reject how sort of, you know, patriarchal cisnormative culture wants to define us in terms of these either or kinds of notions. And I just think that's beautiful. I really love that. So I just wanted to share that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I think we got a question in the chat. Someone, Casey, asked about my writing process, which this will be a fun answer. How long did it take you to write? Did it mostly flow, or did you need to revisit it many times? So I think that this piece came out very quickly, if I remember correctly. Once I started writing about it, I cut probably about as much as on the page off. And that's my typical process. Even in school, I would overwrite and cut down. And, you know, I did edit it, but it felt, you know, I wanted it to show the sort of, I guess maybe a timeline of queer awareness that isn't a coming out story. I'm tired of for me personally, I'm tired of coming out stories. And I think that there's so much before and so much after that moment. And I wanted, you know, life is long, and to talk about what happens in queer lives after the after, and after the moment that I think tends to be depicted in movies and books and things like that, was really important to me. And so I do remember I was in my office at Western not grading, and I wrote this piece. So, you know, that was a lovely distraction. But it was very quick, which I think nonfiction for me tends to be pretty quick.
Oh, she's
think-
back. Are you back, Rebecca? We were just talking about you.
There it is.
Dang, I wanted to get through this whole meeting without you being right.
Really, I've only been asking questions, just keeping the conversation going, just waiting on your call to drop. So now that I'm proved correct, I'm just
I apologize. I still have my question, but go ahead.
Oh yeah. No, Rebecca, let's hear your question. You haven't.
Adam, I know you're feeling very righteous right now.
I'm gonna mute myself. Watch it.
Right, go ahead, sir. So Emily, I mean, no surprise, like everyone else, was really touched by your piece. And even as you were reading it, and like Adam, I've read it several times and have gone back and forth with Rachel on the illustrations and but to be honest, not until you read it did I feel like it so much more viscerally than when you read it. And there's this one particular, I mean, there's several parts, but just for the sake of time, there's this one particular part that really resonated with me. And it's something that Adam and I talk about a lot. And it's actually something that I talk about with anyone who will listen. But it's the part where you talk about how, and I'm paraphrasing, but you talk about what it means to marry your love for your community with the acknowledgement that it may not love you back. And I think this is something that I feel like I've carried myself, like I've carried with me my whole life, is just this feeling of where you feel like your home place, that you feel like you said, you aren't your full self unless you're home yet. And so I can really relate to that. It's like you aren't your full self unless you're home, but at the same time, it feels like where your home place is very obvious that you are often not loved back. And so it's this feeling of, well, do you go and search for a new home where you feel better, where you feel more accepted, where you feel so like you don't have to face the same things? And maybe superficially some of those things are true, but at the same time it just doesn't ever feel like home. So it's just, for me, it has always been a constant tension around that, in terms of, you know, how can you grow up in rural spaces that may not love you and your family very much, but you love them. It's just it just feels like something I've had to try to reconcile my whole life. And so even now, you know, I've chosen consciously to raise my children in a very rural space, because I want them to feel like this is your home too. You're not an outsider. This is your home. But I can tell even my teenagers are like, we are ready to leave. We don't want to be here. We just want to go somewhere else, you know. And so I just watch them go through the same experiences I went through. And on some level, it's a little heartbreaking. And then at another level, I guess it's very common and natural. But I guess I just wanted to, hear more from you about, like, how have you found some reconciliation with the idea of that tension? Do you feel like it's something that gets resolved, or is it just an ever-present tension that we just navigate?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have like a nice answer, but I do have thoughts. I'm in academia, and I go to conferences and I have colleagues all around the country, and went to graduate school and all of this stuff. And what I started realizing pretty quickly was that there were a lot of people who know the words to use, know the way that they're supposed to approach things in the world, have knowledge of that, and still are extremely small-minded, and are extremely bigoted in ways that they don't often reconcile, and are, on the surface, you think like, oh, we're going to get along. It's going to be great. I can be my whole authentic self. And then, something will come up in conversation, or there'll be a passing joke or a passing, this or that. And you're back to, wait a minute, I'm where I'm supposed to be. I'm, in a room full of people with, I call them word doctors and PhDs in English, right? Like, I'm in this room full of people where language and, culture is supposed to be, what you've devoted your life to. And I'm going to have to explain to you why you can't use that word. Okay. And it's like, there's no difference there to me between that and, someone who does not go to college, or someone who has never heard that this word is not okay to use, or whatever else. And the more of those experiences I had, the worse I realized it was most places, the less it seemed like a contradiction to be in Appalachia or in the South. Because I don't think that there is, a city or a state or a world where it's all good. And the more I saw that, I think the better it was. I'm also very very lucky that my family of origin and my spouse's family love us unconditionally. My parents adore my spouse. I went to visit them without my spouse, and they were like, "Well, this is fine, but we." I was like, we'll come together next time, and so, and my parents-in-law love me, and I know that. And so our families of origin are endlessly loving and supportive. And so I think that also makes a really huge difference for me, in ways that I know is not true for other people. And I think it would be I would have a very different experience if that wasn't the case.
I think one thing that has always been helpful to me, and I appreciated you mentioning it in your piece, is the connection to the land. As a kid, I spent a lot of time on the Current River, and it's something that I think helped me kind of navigate the human element of hardship, of struggle, in that there was always something natural that I could be around, and it could provide me some solace. And I completely agree around, there's these places where you think, hey, this will be a comfortable place. It's a city, or it's, in the West, or it's wherever, it's in another region, it's something different. But I'm always the first to tell people it's all the same. It just looks a little different. It has a different mask on its face. It's not any really different. And in fact, it's worse in a lot of ways, because it's a little bit trickier to see. But one thing I've never found anywhere else is the connection to the land. And I think that's not something that we talk enough about in terms of resistance. And I don't even know the right word, but it's like a very spiritual feeding, like a thing that can feed people especially when they're from rural places, that I don't think gets enough credit. So I really appreciate you mentioning it in your piece. So thank you.
Yeah, it was great. I have like a life rule that meetings over an hour never manifest anything good. And so this meeting's been so great. We have one last question, Emily, if you don't mind. We're going to ask this of all the authors, because with the work we do with all y'all, we try for it not to just be talk, right? I mean, at some point we have to do things. If we're going to make a better South, we have to do things to make it better. So the question that we want to ask everybody just in closing is just, what is the work that this piece necessitates? So what is it that you think this piece is telling us we need to do to work toward that better South?
Yeah, I think that I alluded to it in the opener, I think, but to get rid of the expectations of whatever normativity that is coming up. And I think that, especially in conversations with other queer people and other people in the South and other queer Appalachians and things like that, every single person expresses a frustration with, oh, if I'm a queer Southerner, I have to like this or look this way or sound this way or have this experience or have this story. And I see that a lot also in Appalachian studies, of course, where, in an attempt to be seen and to be visible and to be loved and to be in community, I think a lot of the times we push away the parts of ourselves that trouble the narrative, and we center the things that we all have in common. And, I think if our goal is to build a South and an Appalachia that is for everyone, you have to hold space for and honor the contradictions or the, asterisks or the, and also this thing that comes up in everyone's life and in everyone's politics and in everyone's whole selves. Because I see a lot of people self-editing and self-regulating because of the need to be a certain kind of queer, a certain kind of Appalachian. And I wish that would stop.
I think that's a great answer and a great way to end a great first talk. So I don't know if you're supposed to clap on Zoom, but a round of applause. Thank you, Emily, for sharing all that you shared and for giving us this hour of your time. We really appreciate it so much. And y'all that showed up, whether you asked a question or just sat and listened, it doesn't matter to us. We're just glad that you came. We appreciate that you came. And we appreciate all that you do. Clearly, if you showed up to this meeting, do we call it a meeting? That sounds really boring. If you showed up to this fun time we just had together, then you're clearly invested in that idea of a better South. And it's to end on a community note. It feels good sometimes to reconnect with a community of folks that are all trying to work to do right by folks. So thank y'all so much. We'll be having these about once a month, every 6 weeks or so, depending on people's schedule. So tell your friends, tell your neighbors, and y'all come back.